The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
Good afternoon. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. I am your host, Drew Murray. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Leslie Acosta from Voices of Change. And my guest today, not in studio, but on Zoom, is my friend Pat Christmas, the policy director from the Committee of 70. So, Pat, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So, I think most people, probably most of my listeners know the Committee of 70 and what you do. But for those who don't, what is the Committee of 70?
So 70 is a somewhat unusual organization founded more than 100 years ago to push back against what was at the time actually a Republican machine that dominated the city of Philadelphia and actually much of the suburbs. Of course, the parties changed over a bit in the mid-20th century. Now this is a Democratic controlled town. But we have a pretty traditional, standard good government agenda: election reform, redistricting, making sure that voters are aware of the candidates in the offices, campaign finance, ethics, lobbying, things of that sort. But elections and redistricting are really the issues of the day right now.
No, absolutely. And for those who may not know, whenever we do the census nationally, that's when redistricting occurs. And a lot of us think about redistricting from at a federal level, the congressional seats, and at a state level, but it also does happen on a municipal level in the city of Philadelphia and the 10 districts in the city. There will be a redistricting process that will start, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, at the end of September, correct? Is that still the current schedule?
It'll start sometime in the fall. Yeah. So there has been unprecedented attention on the state and federal redistricting processes in Pennsylvania and other states. But as you noted, we redistrict local boundaries as well where they exist. So with our 10 Philadelphia districts, whenever that final census data is available, and the latest we're told it'll be released is September 30th. That's what kicks off a 6-month timeline for City Council to pass an ordinance. Just a bill, simple bill saying what the districts would look like. And the mayor has to sign it, or the mayor can veto it.
Redistricting and how it works, which is the process of redrawing voting district lines to reflect the population changes. And it's also part of our democracy. What has happened, though, throughout the years, and the census is done every 10 years. And so with the census, you have also the redistricting of these and the redrawn of these maps. And so part of the issue has been, Pat, that when these maps have been drawn, they have not been drawn fairly across the board. So that's why you have like lopsided districts where you have majority districts. And hopefully with the new census out and the new redistricting, we have people like yourself and others at the table to ensure that we do have a fair mapping across Pennsylvania. What say you about that?
Well, I think we're gonna be in better shape, at least at the state and federal level this time around, than we were last time. And on the congressional side, one reason for that is that power is divided, which oftentimes is helpful to make sure one side doesn't take advantage of the other. So on the congressional side, the legislature is still controlled by Republicans. They're the ones who have to pass a bill at their level, a congressional redistricting bill, that is, and the governor can sign it or veto it. For the state legislative districts, there's a bipartisan commission that'll draw those. And again, it's bipartisan, and we have right now a chair who I think is going to take that role pretty seriously and making sure that, again, we don't have gerrymandered very egregiously on one side or the other. Here in Philly, it's a little bit different, right? I mean, there's only so much partisan gerrymandering that can happen just because the voter registration is so lopsided. But still, I think there's some issues that we're gonna want to be mindful of.
Yeah. Can you explain to us, Pat, why redistricting happens? I mean, what's the process that's involved in that? We know that Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution lays out, Section 4 of the Constitution gives us the state's primary authority to regulate federal elections, including congressional redistricting. Can you lay out the process, the redistricting process for us?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the most important and fundamental reasons that we do this, redraw political boundaries, is so that we meet this one person, one vote principle. Because it has not always been the case that we made sure that each district had roughly the same number of folks. In fact, it wasn't even that long ago, earlier in the 20th century, where some districts were packed full of people and others had just a few. And then there's districts that only had a few voters. That basically meant those voters' votes counted a whole lot more than those in packed districts. So there were a series of Supreme Court decisions about this in the mid 20th century, and that is been very much why we have to redraw these lines the way we do. I think another thing that's worth noting is that the practice of gerrymandering, drawing lines to manipulate the process, to manipulate it for one party or for the other, for or against challengers or incumbents. That's a very old tactic. It's been around for a very long time. But the data and the computing power that we have available today makes it so much more dangerous. And further, in the 2010 cycle, in particular, we saw this played out in states across the country. Sometimes by Republicans, or in fact, mostly by Republicans in that particular cycle. But Democrats, where they could, did the same thing. So it's one of those things where whoever has the power is going to be inclined perhaps to use it in a way that they should not.
Yeah, Pat, one of the things interesting about this process of redistricting, in 1964, the Supreme Court had ruled the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which requires the voting districts to be equal in population, which means not only equal in population, which means that these maps, when they're drawn, the people should be selecting the politicians, not the politicians, the districts. Have you seen across the board throughout the years, which has been now reversed, where now the politicians are selecting the districts that they want to represent? Have you seen that in progress?
Well, yeah, I think that, actually politicians picking their voters has been kind of the status quo going back for forever. That very important Supreme Court decision you mentioned was getting at making sure these districts were roughly of equal population, and at the federal level they have to be almost exactly in population, equal population. At the local level, for example, here in Philly, the understanding is that we have up to like a 10% deviation between the districts. So there can be some give or take there. But in Philadelphia, it's our elected officials who draw their own maps. At the state level here in Pennsylvania, to a great extent, it's still the state elected officials who draw their own maps, because it's the leaders who sit on that bipartisan commission. And then at the federal level, it's the General Assembly, again, the elected officials who are not drawing their maps, but drawing the maps of their federal colleagues. So that is the status quo across much of the country, and we think it's problematic, right? Because there's a pretty clear conflict of interest there.
And it's really interesting on a municipal level, Pat, because oftentimes, especially the state, and I'll use the state of Pennsylvania as an example. And people will also oftentimes state it's a gerrymandered state, and it was gerrymandered by the Republicans because those are the ones who are in power. And it almost doesn't matter who's in power. Whoever's in power, if they have the ability to gerrymander, they're probably going to do it. But in the city of Philadelphia, it's, as you stated earlier, it's a Democratic city. So it's not really a power struggle between the Democrats and the Republicans, but there is still a power struggle. Gerrymandering still does occur. And I guess, and you can answer this question, why does it occur in a city that is dominated by Democrats? Is it purely city council members trying to kind of maintain power and maintain the wards or divisions that they want to keep in their district? Is that kind of why we, especially, I think it was in 2001, we really saw a large amount of gerrymandering in the districts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the wards and divisions are certainly one factor, right? And I think it's only natural. We'd only expect elected officials, if they're trying to make sure that they're in a relatively safe seat because they have an agenda they want to accomplish, that they try to put voters into their district who they know, who they think they can count on their support of. So yeah, here in Philly, yeah, that's a word politics question. Surely that's always been a factor in how these lines are drawn. But race and ethnicity also plays a very big role. Here in Philly, as I know you both know, we've had at least in the past, one of the most egregious.
So I apologize, Pat. We're having some technical difficulties on this end. I am not hearing Pat any longer, even from the sound booth.
Okay. The other thing, Pat, that I would like to address in this particular issue of redistricting is that congressional redistricting in Pennsylvania has always been a very daunting process, right? We do know that the congressional redistricting starts with like a apportionment because the U.S. House has what 400, a total of 435 seats. So the country must always be divided into 435 congressional districts. But some states are growing in population, while others are not growing in population. So this reapportionment is the process of adjusting how many of those 435 seats each state should get, depending on how the country's population has changed since the last census. So there are states gaining population or more likely to gain more House seats, while states with stable or declining populations are likely to lose those seats. So that's why Pennsylvania lost one House seat, Drew, and after the last census, it was projected to lose one or two more in 2020. Can you explain to us why this is so important, especially in Pennsylvania, which tend to have a lot of changes in their redistricting, which is one of the reasons why Pennsylvania is a target for gerrymandering?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Can you all hear me at this point? Hear me now? Drew? No, testing. No, nothing coming through. Testing. Am I coming through live though through the for the audience? Yeah. Well, here I'll riff on an answer real quick, and we'll see if we can get the audio going, just in case this is still coming through to the folks at home and folks at work. So that's a really excellent question about the reapportionment. I mean, we do have 435 members in the House, as you noted, and Pennsylvania has lost a seat, lost a congressional seat in after each census going back to the 1930s. And this is, yes, very consequential for us because it basically means we kind of start with a blank slate when we draw those congressional maps, and it's almost like a game of musical chairs because someone is going to lose their seat, someone is going to lose their job, guaranteed when that happens. So we went from 18 congressional seats, previously, and now we're going to be down to 17 after this cycle, and we don't know where that district is going to disappear from. It's going to disappear from the southeast, the southwest, somewhere else in the state. We'll just have to see.
So when does the process start? We don't have definitive dates yet, I guess, from when the census is going to be complete. I think I heard September 28th, but I don't know if that's confirmed yet, and do you even know if that's confirmed?
You know what? So the census is going to release some sort of legacy format data in August, we're told, and that data may be granular enough so that even if it doesn't kick off the legal timeline for doing this process, anyone inside of government or outside of government can go ahead and start drawing maps. We understand, at least right now, that the final official data, all we have is like an end deadline. So September 30th would be the absolute latest, but it could be released earlier. It could be released just after Labor Day, and at that point, we're kind of off to the races because at the local, state, or federal level, wherever this redistricting takes place, there's usually a trigger based off of when the census releases that data. So we'll just have to see, but it'll be sometime this fall that we'll be beginning this process.
And how does the timeline work for City Council, for example? What happens there? So whatever date it is, whatever date kicks off that deadline or starts the process.
Yeah. So in the home rule charter, right, which is, I know you folks know this is like the Constitution for the City of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sets off a 6-month timeline from the date that the census data is released. And City Council has, within that 6 months, to introduce a bill, put it in the committee, move it out of committee. This bill would describe where the districts are going to be, where the boundaries are. Because it's just a regular old bill, it could be either signed by the mayor and approved or vetoed by the mayor. If it's approved within that 6-month period, we're all good. We have our new maps and off we go. If such a bill has not been approved within that 6 months, City Council starts getting their pay withheld. And that pay will remain withheld until the map is passed. So this actually has been of some consequence in past cycles where The mayor and city council had a disagreement around these districts, and they got into this timeline where council members were starting to get their pay again held back. So that's what the timeline looks like. I mean, we'll have to see exactly how this plays out in this particular city council. We just mentioned how at the congressional level, it's a game of musical chairs, blank slate. We don't know who's going to lose their job, who's going to lose their district. With city council, that's not the case. We have 10 districts now. We'll have 10 districts after this. And frankly, I think, at least a decent number of people look at the districts right now and think they're fairly suitable, right? I mean, the egregious gerrymander that cracked the Latino community in North and Northeast Philadelphia was largely resolved in the last cycle. So I think there's still a few, gerrymanders in there, not of the egregious nature that we've seen before. And some of these boundaries are going to have to move around because, to my understanding, a couple of the districts where we've had more of the division, those districts are more bursting at the seams, and so the boundaries will have to shift around to an extent. But it's a 6-month timeline at a minimum here in Philly.
Gotcha.
And I'm glad they're getting aggressive with that. I mean, holding the pay until this gets resolved. That's a good.
Well, that's in the homeroom charter. That's in the charter.
In the charter, yeah. I have one more question, Drew, because this is very, very important, Pat, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion, especially for the Latino community, which we've never had. I would say it has changed. Obviously, it has improved, but we have always gotten, it hasn't been fair for Black and brown communities when it comes to redistricting. But I want to go back to the state legislature and the redistricting at that level. The PA House and the Senate, they have a commission, and it's comprised of your state legislative individuals. So there's 5 members, and then you have the PA Supreme Court who appoints a chair to that commission. So this commission has exclusive authority to draw these maps. And obviously, because they have this authority, and the majority are Republicans, they have been able to not do things nearly equal in population as the Constitution stated in 1964, and that has created a lot of confusion in this type of redistricting. So what is Committee of 70? I know they have filed several lawsuits in regards to this. This has cost a lot of money because of this unfairness. Can you talk to us a little bit about do you guys have a commission outside of the commission that's already appointed by the legislature to have people appointed that can draw these maps in a fair manner? Where's Committee of 70 at this point with that?
Yeah. There have been a number of organizations that have been lobbying and advocating very, very vigorously for at least 4 or 5 years, actually, to codify reforms for the state legislative and the congressional process in Harrisburg. Unfortunately, those reforms have not gone through. So we're stuck with the status quo processes, which you mentioned the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, this 5-member body, is actually actually much better than what a lot of other states have, which is just a regular old statutory process through their legislature, and it has to be bipartisan. And as you noted, if the first 4 members, who are basically the 4 party leaders in the General Assembly, can agree on that 5th member, and the chair, a very powerful position, the Supreme Court chooses, which it did just last month. Chose Mark Nordenberg, the former University of Pennsylvania, or Pittsburgh, chancellor, who's again generally regarded as a fair and details-oriented person. I think something that's very, very much worth noting with this particular LRC: 2 women on this 5-member LRC, first time ever, and Joanna McClinton of Philadelphia in the Southeast, the first person of color on the LRC. So that on its own, the other woman's Kim Ward, a Republican from Southwest PA. Those folks being on the body, I think, really changes the dynamic a bit. Joanna McClinton also made a very important point in the very first commission meeting last month, in that prison gerrymandering, this concept of counting folks where they're incarcerated as opposed to in their home communities, may be something the LRC has discretion over. So I think this is where the dynamic this time around is much different from 10 years ago, and just the public has a much better sense of how dangerous this process can be if it goes off the rails.
Well, here's the thing. The legislature, right, nor the chair does not vote on the legislature nor the governor vote on the commission's plans. And so the governor has no power to sign or veto this whatever the commission brings forth. However, this gives the party leaders enormous power over mapping. And so we have to make sure, as you're mentioning, that we have people part of that commission that can be a voice for people that are exempt from this process, right? And so obviously, we want to be able to have people that don't have that. There's not a conflict of interest, or people that can draw or have their opinion in these maps, but in a fair manner.
Yeah, yeah. Again, that's an excellent point. It's really worth noting this because the narratives around so many public issues, right, can become oversimplified. Both on the congressional map that we've had the past, well, I guess not the past 10 years because we had a new one drawn by the court, but the congressional map that was drawn in 2011, 2012, and the state legislative map that was drawn at the same time, that was by no means just one party or the other. Both parties worked together. I might even use the word, collaborated or colluded over the congressional map and what we got there. And same thing on the state side, because again, when it comes to folks in Harrisburg, especially the leaders, a lot of it's about maintaining some degree of control, some degree of power, and folks who have power are you going to use it, as they see fit. I mean, that's just kind of the way people behave. So that dynamic has played out on the LRC in the past, as you know, and also on the congressional side. So this is where I think between the Committee 70 and Common Cause and League of Women Voters and PA Voice. I mean, there are a whole bunch of organizations, Fair Districts PA. There's a ton of grassroots energy around the process that we haven't seen before, and I think that'll help provide at least some bumper lanes for the sorts of mapping plans that we see.
I have one more question.
Sure. No,
I have a passion for this.
You're like my guest expert today, Leslie. And since I couldn't hear Pat for the first 20 minutes, I don't know if I'm answering questions he already answered.
I have a real passion for this because this is so important. I think that if we're going to do stuff fairly, we have to have people at the table that know what they're talking about, like yourself. Committee of 70, they've been very good with this. Fair District PA. They're advocating for a constitutional amendment to the Constitution to establish their own independent commission. Do you know where are they in terms of this commission and what's going on with that?
Yeah. So this is basically a reform that's been sought for a number of years here. I mean, the Committee of 70 has supported these independent commission proposals. Common Cause has, League of Women Voters, Fair Districts PA, and others. The bottom line is, these independent commissions in their best form would take power almost entirely away from the elected officials who currently have it. Right. As you all know, that's very difficult to do. There are also, notably, there aren't that many of these kind of gold standard independent redistricting commissions out there across the United States. I think this is still an issue that the country is realizing that it has to deal with. And in those states that have, the most advanced reforms, they tend to be able to put things straight to the ballot and circumvent the legislature altogether. So, we can't do that. And there's bipartisan support for these sorts of reforms, and there's bipartisan opposition to these sort of reforms. So, we're not counting at all on this commission being set up. And in fact, it's really too late to do that. We're going to have to count on public engagement, vigorous public engagement and education and outreach to the people who currently have the power to make sure that the lines that are drawn in the public's interest to the greatest extent possible, and not for the parties and not for the incumbents. In
these states that do it, how do they do it? I mean, you really do need experts to kind of redraw these lines. You know, level of expertise in the census and the laws. Is it purely a nonpartisan committee that is just brought together of experts? Is it done? Do we have the software to do this yet? I mean, you would think at this point in where we are, we could just plug the census data into a software program and it could just spit out boundaries. I know that's probably easier said than done, but are we even going toward that sort of model yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really depends in part on the state. I mean, Iowa, for example, they have a somewhat unique process in that they have a strictly nonpartisan demographer, a mapper who does this process largely for them. But Iowa is very homogenous. It's flat. You can draw most of the districts look like squares or rectangles. It's definitely not Pennsylvania. So California is often put up there as having the best model. They have one of these independent commissions. There's an application process, random selection. It seems to have worked out pretty well there. And these are just, out there, regular old Californians who end up on this commission. And it's intensive, but it's worked well. Those commission members spend a significant amount of time on the trail, hearing from the public. They take into account all sorts of data and go through multiple iterations of a map that they ultimately approve. But again, California is one of those states where you can put something straight to the ballot and circumvent the elected officials. So this is something we have not been able to get done in Pennsylvania. Maybe before 2030, 2031, we'll be able to do that. But for right now, it's really just kind of holding those in power accountable for the sort of mapping plan they put forward. Which you noted the software. I mean, this is really only the second redistricting cycle in the history of history that regular old people, each of us can draw our own map, right? That was not possible 20 years ago. And that's also a game changer this time around.
Sure. So now back to the state legislature, because I'm still learning this. Leslie, you had mentioned that the governor doesn't have veto power, but does it go to the legislature for vote? Does the final map go to the vote to the legislature, or?
I don't, Pat, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't, I think the legislature does not vote on the commission's plan. Is that right, Pat?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And so the final vote comes from whom? It's the commission, correct?
The commission. Yeah, the commission draws a preliminary plan that's out there for public scrutiny, and then they can draw a final plan, and it's a 5-member commission, three votes, wins the day.
Yeah. So that's
a pretty powerful commission.
It is a very powerful. So the fact that McClinton sits on that commission, if that's what you mentioned, I think it's important because she's representative of Philadelphia.
Yes.
And she's also a Democratic chair of the Democratic Party. So that gives a powerful voice in representation of Black and brown communities. To have a voice like that on that commission speaks volumes of the power that Philadelphia does have sitting at that commission.
So of that 5-member commission, obviously Joanna's a Democrat. Is it split? How many Republicans and how many Democrats?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah.
I know it's not partisan, but we're bipartisan, or however.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Representative McClinton, obviously Democrat. Jay Costa is the other member on the D side, and then on the Republican side, Kerry Binnenhoff from the House, and Kim Ward from the Senate. I think Senator Kristen Phillips Hill got appointed to stand in for Senator Ward. So those are the two Ds and the 2 Rs. And then Mark Nordenberg was appointed by the court. I believe Mark does have a mostly a history of voting Democratic. But I think the expectation of him, and this is actually an expectation we and others have communicated to him, is we want him to play this fairly. And frankly, less for the parties and more for Pennsylvanians,
Sure.
Because you mentioned, even just with Philly, something that Representative McClinton will be able to keep in mind is the gerrymandering with our state House and state Senate maps. To an extent, there is partisan gerrymandering, especially once you get out into the suburbs. But within the city of Philadelphia, it's more the ward politics that you mentioned earlier, Drew. So
Absolutely.
Those are the sorts of things that Joanna is in a position to weigh in on that we haven't had before.
All right. Well, Pat, I know you have another commitment at 1:40, so you have to jump off early. I want to thank you for coming on. We're going to have you back because this is a big topic, and we're going to have you back. We'll do the full hour, and hopefully we won't have some technical difficulties, and maybe we'll even have you in studio now that we're mostly all vaccinated. So, Pat, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. I literally called you about 2 hours ago and asked if you would come on. So thank you so much.
That's terrific. I love to come back. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So why don't we take a quick break, and then I'll come back, and Leslie and I will talk gerrymandering, census, and redistricting for the final 20 minutes. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone.
The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.
back. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone. I am your host, Drew Murray, here with my friend Leslie Acosta from the Voices of Change. We don't have Pat Christmas anymore. He had to jump off, and I do apologize. I couldn't hear anything for the first basically 20 minutes. I couldn't hear Pat,
Yeah.
so I could hear you. I had no idea what Pat was responding, so we resolved it toward the end there. So, but. So again, I can't even respond to what Pat talked about in the beginning, but it's an extremely, number one, important topic that most people probably don't even realize that it's coming up.
Well, no, not only important, the power of redistricting, but the most important thing, the people that sit on that commission to make the decision on the redistricting is also a powerful position where they have power of this decision making. And I think Pat was mentioning, how that commission works. And the power behind it. And so, that we here in Pennsylvania, we have been gerrymandered in such a way that it has been unfair, Drew. And hopefully, with this new commission that's in place, hopefully we're going to continue to make strides in making this more fair across the board, especially in the city of Philadelphia. Sure. I mean, you mentioned something that I did not know. I didn't know that that it's in the charter that if council does not vote on time, their pay will be.
They get no pay.
I had no idea.
I think the mayor should also get no pay, and maybe that's. I want to ask Pat that, but I thought maybe he mentioned it, so I didn't want to ask again. But I think the mayor's pay should be, because he or she is involved in that process as well, right? Because he can veto. He or she can. I keep saying he because it's Mayor Kenny right now. He could veto whatever they come to him with. So the mayor's pay should be revoked. I think the mayor's pay should be revoked for many other reasons, but for many other reasons. But I think it's a great idea. I think they should just do that across the board. Whenever Congress or whenever our state legislature that doesn't act correctly or doesn't meet deadlines. I mean, I know I don't get paid if I don't meet deadlines. I'm not going to get paid in my real life. So I think it's a great thing that city council's not paid. I think they should do that for every year at the budget process. Like we're going through the budget process right now for city council. If they don't have it done by June 30th, then their pay's revoked.
Well, yeah.
I guarantee they'll pass that budget every year.
Good luck with that, Drew. I mean, a lot has to change internally in internal politics of the city of Philadelphia. But it's a system that has been in place for so many years, and to have change and to have people fit to that change is going to be nearly impossible. But going back to this redistricting seats, Drew, that we're going to be losing. We lost already one seat in Pennsylvania, possibly a second seat in Pennsylvania.
A congressional seat.
A congressional seat. So that would, in the U.S. House, so that I don't know if that's going to affect the Democrat or Republican if that seat is lost. I don't know what the answer to that might be, Drew, and where that's going to that cut's going to occur. But it's going to happen with this new 2020 redistricting. Do you know anything about that?
I do not. I've heard the preliminary data like you that we will lose because our population decreased or it may not even have decreased, but it may not have kept up with other states. And that's
they're saying Ryan Costello, who was a congressman, he's retiring, and they don't know if the retirement is due to his particular district being also cut out once this is said and done. So those are the chatters, but we don't know if that's the case. Anything else pending, Drew?
Well, the municipal level is also interesting to me because as we talked to Pat about, normally it's Republican versus Democrat, and we're trying to, Republicans are trying to get their districting the way they want it, gerrymandered the way they want it. Democrats, by the way, if Democrats were in power in Pennsylvania, it would have been gerrymandered for Democrats as well. I always like to say that. I always hear people in Pennsylvania like, oh, the Republicans are horrible people, they gerrymandered. If the Democrats were in power, they would have done the same thing. But in the city, it's not Republican versus Democrat. It's really the city council members trying to draw the district to make it more likely for them to, number one, get reelected, or even grab powers in wards or divisions in wards to most benefit them. And if you look at the map, and you don't do this unless you're kind of interested in this, you got to look at the map from 2001 and the way it was gerrymandered, what it looks like now versus then, because it was very clearly gerrymandered. And Pat intimated at one point it really disenfranchised the Latino community in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, and I got to look into this a bit more, but it was absolutely done to break up the Latino vote.
Well, depleted, and because we have two things that are against the Latino vote, right? Because we are a voting bloc if we unite and we get together.
But it's a
But
smaller
if you-
community
right.
compared to some others.
Well, look, Pennsylvania, 6% of the population is Latino, right? We have 12 million residents in Pennsylvania. 750,000 are Latinos, right? So there is a voting bloc in Pennsylvania scattered throughout. Here in Philadelphia, it's scattered because of the infighting. But gerrymandering exacerbates that issue of dividing the vote. And so, that's why it's important to ensure that we get redistricting, especially for the Latino community, that it's done in a fair manner. We had for many, many years, one Latino state rep seat. Now we have two. We don't have a senatorial district that is represented by Latino, and we should have because we have the numbers. We don't have a congressional Latino ever. We've never elected a Latino from Philadelphia. So if these maps are going to be drawn fairly, I think that if it's done in a fair manner, I think it opens the opportunity for a senatorial seat, for a congressional seat, for a second Latino seat. 197, the 197, if you look at the 197, is split half and half. So 52% of the population is Latino and 48% is African American. So there's the difference is not a lot. It should be where there's a heavy Latino. In other words, the 42nd ward should not be split. It should be all of ours. The 43rd ward should be all Latino. Push it to where the Latino population lives so that we do have representation of a Latino seat, not split right down the middle, which is what we currently have now.
Sure. And I think on the municipal level, it could get very interesting because we have a mayor election coming up in a couple of years.
Right, and we only have one seat.
And you only have
Latino
one,
seat.
and
they're
depending on
and they're fighting for that one
Yeah.
seat.
and depending on the rumors, you might have that person step down. Maria could step down if she wants to run for mayor, because if you run for mayor in the city of Philadelphia and you're a city council person, you have to step down from that position. So I think we're going to start hearing announcements soon. Maybe not in the next 6 months, but in the next year. So I think within that 6-month window of the timing that city council has to redistrict and redo these maps, you might see some council members who announce and then have to step down.
Yeah.
Which could then completely change that dynamic again, because halfway through the process, you might have a new city council person.
Yeah, I also think that, getting elected, whether you're Latino, black, or white, has to, the onus is on the candidate to project themselves to the voters. It's good to have Latino representation. I'm all for that, but it also depends on the candidate. And I think we need to have candidates of caliber, professional people, that can give something back to their community. We don't want deadbeats. We don't want parasites, political parasites, or political butterfly. We want people that can represent a district. Maria Quiñones is, you say whatever you may with her, but she has a level of power. She knows what she's doing. So we need people like that that can represent the Latino community effectively and efficiently.
Sure. And I've never said anything bad about Maria. You were looking at me like I said I've never said
no.
nothing.
I'm not saying you. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you always had good things to
Yeah,
say about
no,
Maria Quiñones.
Sure.
In ideology, you might differ, but I've never heard you say anything,
Yeah,
bad about Maria Quiñones. No one is perfect in politics. She has her share of issues, but she does represent the Latino community, and we have to, that has to be, she was voted, voters spoke, and we have to respect that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the only thing I've said, I
She's progressive.
everyone, I know she's progressive. And that's what I want a Latino Republican to win that district. How about that?
Yeah.
Do you think we could get that?
I don't think so. After the Working Families Party came about, they took that one seat from you guys who was held for 50 years, 2 Republican seats. Now it went
Some
to
may
the,
say stolen.
well, I
Some
don't
may
know.
say
I don't
stolen.
know about stolen. The same thing they said about Donald Trump. But the point is, they took that seat away from
Yes.
from the Republicans.
And the reason I say
So the-
stolen, there was nothing wrong with the actual election. My argument is the Working Families Party is not an independent party.
Well,
It's part of the
Democratic
It
Party.
is part of the Democratic Party, so they should not have been able
It's like a
to
branch.
run.
It's like a branch
It
of
is
the
that, yeah.
Democratic Party.
I mean, what they do mostly is they endorse and raise money for Democratic candidates. So how do they call themselves an independent party if they raise money and endorse them? The Republican Party is never going to endorse another party, even an independent. They're not going to endorse some Libertarian Party. So the Working Families Party, in my opinion, should not be permitted to put up candidates, at least in Philadelphia, to fill the minority seats. Because there's two set aside for a non-Democrat. It could be anybody. If it was a Libertarian Party, the Green Party, I would have no issue with it. But the Working Families Party is absolutely a wing of the Democratic Party.
Well, it is a wing. It's a branch of the Democratic Party, and they call themselves a Working Families. I don't know if you want to divide it and say, well, the Working Family Party is extremely progressive, extremely left in their views, but they're part of the Democratic Party.
Yes, they absolutely
and so I don't know the point of that. But they won that seat, and they took that seat away from a Republican.
They did, and they got the vote, so there's no argument there, but they should never have been permitted to run. It takes away the purpose of the minority seats. The whole purpose is to have another voice, and a voice of what is traditionally a bipartisan country and city that Republicans or someone other than a Democrat be on city council in those 7 at-large seats. So it's, on the district level, the 10 districts, there's no rules there. But of the 7 seats that are for at-large, the 2 that are set aside for a minority party or a party other than the Democrats, the Working Families Party should not be permitted to run. And I was a little disappointed that we didn't hear more council people who are Democrats state that the Working Families Party should not run.
Well,
in fact, some endorsed them, and I thought that was wrong.
Well, Drew, Philadelphia is heavily Democratic, right? So it's very difficult to navigate politically or survive as a Republican politically in Philadelphia because it's so heavily tilted Democratic. So that's a challenge in itself for any Republican Party. David O, God bless him, how he has survived in his seat, and because he's the only one right now representing the Republican Party.
The at-large. We still, so we still Councilman O'Neill in the 10th district.
Well, O'Neill, I don't know how long he's going to remain in that seat. That remains to be seen. And maybe someone will be replacing him soon in that seat.
Maybe. I mean, he's getting older, but he still shows up to work every day, and we just need a Republican to stay. We need at least a few Republicans on city council.
Yeah, you guys are outnumbered. Okay?
We are a little out now. I don't know. People say, why would you be a Republican in the city of Philadelphia? And I sometimes say, it's a good question to a degree. I mean, I am a Republican, but I don't get I basically don't pick any. I couldn't vote for Kras. I couldn't vote against for Krasner in the primary for Vega. So in many of these elections, that more than likely the Democratic. The person who wins the Democratic primary is probably going to win. As a Republican, I don't even get to vote in that. But what are you going to do? I'm still a Republican. I still will be running for office in the future.
I know you
as
will.
a Republican.
I know you will.
And I'm not. People have asked, will you go back to Democrat? Drew, you're kind of moderate. I said no. I'm a capitalist. I will not go back to the Democratic Party.
Okay. Well,
I'm a capitalist and a Republican.
You didn't abandon the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party.
That's right. They left me. That's what that is absolutely true. It is not the party that I registered for in 1990.
That's a long
Way
time
back,
ago.
we're getting old. So it looks like we're coming up on our time.
Yes.
So we're gonna come back to this subject. We're gonna bring Pat Christmas back on from the Committee of 70, and we're gonna talk about this because it is so important.
Yeah.
So thank you, Leslie, for coming on.
Thank you, Drew.
And thank everyone for listening. You're listening to USALA Media and the Republican Zone.
The Republican Zone is brought to you by Drew Murray, a modern view from the Republican lens, covering local and national news, understanding that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to politics. The Republican Zone airs Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m.